All right. This is topic 4.3, Columbian Exchange. We did an activity about the Columbian Exchange, and I feel like it's a pretty self-explained topic, but I figured in case you wanted to go over it, I'd do this little lecture, and you guys can watch it at your leisure. All right, so the whole point for this is explain the causes of the Columbian Exchange and the effects on both the Eastern and Western Hemisphere. One of the big things is which agricultural or livestock or whatever, which transmitted from the old world to the new world versus the new world to the old world. And this does a really good job of showing. Here you have like turkeys, pumpkins, maize, beans, chocolate, tomatoes, pineapples. That's all stuff that came from the new world that's going to be sent to the old world, which is Afro-Eurasia. And here's all the things from Afro-Eurasia that will be going this way. All right. So when we look at iconic things, horses, pigs, cattle, all of these animals are brand new. And then another interesting aspect too, when we talk about the Columbian Exchange, it's a good idea to focus on things like okra and rice. Not only are they just coming over from the old world to the new world, they're coming over directly because of slavery. So this is African slaves being brought over, or not brought over, forced over. And this is part of their culture that they bring over, and it's why we can still find it in the, quote, New World in the Americas today as part of that culture living on. Okay, so think about what you ate for lunch, and then think about all the things you probably wouldn't have been able to eat 1,000 years ago. So much of the stuff that we consume, like if you had a hamburger, that would not have happened. Because if you lived in America like you do now, you would not have had access to things like cattle. It's amazing how many things you probably would not have had access to. I wish we had more time. I used to do a fun project where kids would have to pick a recipe of something that they really like eating, and then they'd have to chart where they'd have to get all the ingredients from, and how it was just like really complex trying to figure out all the regions that you would have to go to get all these things. So something like pizza would be impossible to have because ingredients come from so many other places, including the old world. Now, another thing that's brought over, not just food and all this like cool stuff, you also have a disease. So with the disease, it's all this acquisition of lack of acquisition of immunity because they've been so far away. We watched that in the Guns, Germs, and Steel, which is why I don't need to spend a lot of time on it. But things like smallpox, measles, typhus, influenza, malaria, yellow fever, those are all Afro-Eurasian diseases that come over to the New World. The New World, when we talk about things that they sent over, the iconic one everyone thinks about is syphilis, as it is an STD, and it comes over in, I guess, larger numbers into the old world. So we have, in some cases, 90% of natives are dying. You can read through this, but basically it's catastrophic how many people are dying because of just the disease. So that's the Guns, Germs, and Steel. This is the germs part. So here we see the population just plummeting due to multiple factors, but the largest is going to be disease. Now, the Columbian Exchange and this great dying that they refer to as all these diseases hitting them hard, it creates a labor shortage, like we saw when the Black Death happened in Europe, and it made room for new people. Because there were so few, we needed new immigrants to come over to colonize the European colonies at this point, but it also meant that there was a call for enslaved Africans to be forcibly transferred over because they wanted to have plantations for these new cash crops and to make tons of money. And with this, because you have so many different types of people now living in a small area with few people, to be honest, you have a lot of diversity being created and living amongst them. So it's the idea that Europeans, Africans, and indigenous people, some of them all start having families with each other, and you get these, they refer to them as new races of people, right? So if somebody has an indigenous parent and a Black parent, or like an African parent, that would be a whole new type of person that exists, a whole new, quote, race that exists because of all this new intermingling of different types of people. So society has to start looking different, and that's where, when we talk about 4.4, the Costas paintings, it really comes down to them trying to reestablish who goes where in a social setting, and a lot of it is due to race. So along with disease and people, plants and animals occur in the Columbian Exchange as well, and it changes everyone's diet. Animals are revolutionary to the New World. When we often think about plains indigenous peoples like the Sioux or the Omaha or the Crow, we often think of them on horseback, and that is because the Columbian Exchange happened, and horses were just such a key factor. So what happens is there's an increased world population overall because everyone has access to these new foods. Better caloric intake, so things like maize and potatoes. They're high density with calories, which means you can feed more people on less food. And when you have high access to them, it means you just have a lot of people who you can, use this stuff with. Cattle, pigs, horses, they multiply very rapidly. And so you might start out with 10 cows, but before you know it, you might have 20 or 30. So it happens very quickly. The problem is they also destroy natural vegetation because they have to eat. And especially in a region where you don't have pack animals, you're not used to that. And so it devastates land supplies. But on the positive side, it is giving you more food opportunities, milk, wool, hides for leather. Horses are probably the most influential piece of pack animal come over, the most influential type. It changes warfare. It lets hunting happen more efficiently for the indigenous communities, and it lets people travel further than just walking, which is why we think of, indigenous cultures today heavily associated with horses. All right, because of things like potatoes and corn and cassava, there's a nutritional foundation that gives people the ability to grow their population. Again, potatoes are very versatile. They're also very high in calories. They might not have, as much nutrition as other things, but they can feed a lot of people and keep that calorie count up, which means people are being fed well and your population can increase. Potatoes and corn are always mentioned because they are native to the New World, the Americas, but then all of a sudden they come over and they're pushed into Asia and Europe, and like corn and peanuts become like a very important food to Asian cultures when it's not naturally there. Or think of the Irish potato famine. We know about that. Well, the only reason that occurred is they got hooked to potatoes after the Columbian Exchange and it became a staple food. Potatoes, corn, they're cheap. They're enough nutrition to keep you by, and they're high calorie. So it really is going to fuel basically people living in poverty. It lets them be fed, and it's going to lead to feeding industrial workers down the line. So here we see world population and city population. Things just start skyrocketing, and it starts coinciding with the new world being run into and globalization occurring. You should go watch this video about cassava. It's a really crucial food in West Africa. Very versatile, but it also is something that keeps the population going. So I suggest accessing the PowerPoint and watching it, at least a little bit of it. And also the Irish potato famine talks about how they were eating so many potatoes in a day. And the whole thing is it's not even a native crop. And when a disease hits the crop and kills most of the potatoes, they all starve because their whole diet, especially people living in poverty or at least on the lower end of the spectrum, they starve and they have to either leave or die. And so it's this really big deal because potatoes have been established as this like staple food in the European diet in this country, even though potatoes aren't from there. So here you can see how many people eventually have to leave. This is looking ahead again because this unit ends in 1750. We're not even here yet. So how this helps in China, agriculture is prospering. You have high yield, so more of a crop growing each season. And then you have the new foods like maize, sweet potatoes, peanuts. All of these become really important. It gives more food options, quick growing food options, which leads to more population. But like we've looked at before, this leads to population growing too fast compared to the food supply, and no one realizes it until much later on. So here you have population just booming. Okra is a really cool food. I have never tried okra. Kids always ask. It is popular in Southern style foods, as we would call it in America today, and that is because okra was brought over by slaves when they were forcibly trafficked over here. And when they brought this with them and added it to their cooking, I mean, it's part of African culture, but the reason we have it in the United States or in the Caribbean today, or specifically in the South in the United States, is because of the slave population. So really cool, again, video to watch about okra. They would like hide seeds and stuff in their hair when they got over, so they could still have like this stuff from home, because they weren't obviously just allowed to bring it. So people got kind of creative to try to bring some comforts of their home with them to this new horrific place through this horrible experience. So what happens now is the Columbian Exchange is so important because now we have a pretty much globalized world. You have 4 continents now, all interacting with each other, 5 actually, because Europe, Asia, Africa, and North and South America. But the new and the old world are now clashing into each other, and new things are being created. Things are being sent back and forth, including people, diseases, food and animals. It's just a further push for globalization at this point. But we do have some issues. Long-term benefits of the Atlantic network were unequally distributed. Western Europe was steaming ahead and benefiting from it. The colonies gave them lots of awesome things. When you colonize a place, you drain it of its resources, and the people who you've moved in there, you now sell them products. So you just get wealthy off of it. That's mercantilism. How much stuff do you have makes you the stronger power, whether it's gold, silver, goods, whatever financially is beneficial. And these European countries are just swimming in it. Colonies provided for an outlet. When you had population growth, you just send them across the ocean. They can go live there. Western Europe is benefiting from this far more than anyone else. You also have sugar colonies. You have sugar plantations is what this is. This is a plantation colony. Sugar cane is something that is wanted. It's a good that people will pay good money for, and we want a lot of it. So people start planting plantations of sugar cane in the Caribbean, and this leads to a bigger call for slavery. And the slave trade starts increasing at this point because of the cash crop of sugarcane. You can get a lot of money for it. And so the plantation system begins, and anybody that studies history knows that plantation systems lead to more slavery, unfortunately. So here are all the things that happened, the effects on the Eastern Hemisphere or the Old World. But it did benefit them is kind of the gist of it. All right. That's it for the Columbian Exchange, short and sweet.